This is Chris. Here we go.
Has joined the conference.
Dean.
Has joined the conference.
I'll just give one more moment for people to join, and then we're going to get started. Okay. Zach, are you ready to kick off? I'm just going to open up a little bit and then going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, I'm all ready.
Okay. Awesome. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks everyone for joining the collab sessions. The point of this is really to get those advanced user topics that everyone's been looking for out there. So that we can review them, discuss them, have our super users go through and show you how they're being implemented on the platform. Not on this one, but on future courses that we're going to do, and we'll do one of these for each week in January, and then we're going to take stock after that and see what we want to do moving forward. There will be additional exercises to work on just because code block is a little bit different. We currently don't have those put together. But
has joined the conference.
As the pages
has joined the conference. Has joined the conference.
Okay. All right. We've joined. We have some pages in the training server, and we can send those out to you afterwards. But thanks for your participation.
Has joined the conference.
Back over to Zach.
All right. Thanks, Chris. And next time we'll make sure to disable that WebEx feature to announce people as they come in. All right.
Has joined the conference.
Thank you for joining. My name is Zach Crittenden. I think a lot of you.
Mohammed.
Has joined the conference.
Okay. So a lot of you know me from the weekly CMS meetings, but for those of you that don't know me, I am the product manager for the marketing platform. So all of your sort of needs and requests send to me. But prior to being the product manager, I was actually a marketer using the marketing platform to create pages and run campaigns and things like that. So I know a lot about the platform also as a marketer and as a power user. So that's why I'm giving this demo today. But we will be having other power users do some of these other demos in the future. So that's who I am. As Chris mentioned, we will actually have these materials on the training server. At the end of the session, we'll have those links available. But I'm going to be doing the demo today in the QA environment.
Has joined the conference.
Because certain features that I'm going to demo work best in the QA environment. So this is kind of the overall agenda. I'm going to give you a quick overview, some of the use cases, backgrounds, and context, and then get into some of the best known methods as well as caveats for using code block and
has
do that
joined the conference
in the context of a demonstration. So the purpose of the code block component is basically a way to create web experiences that are not supported by standard components or templates. So when we demo other features, other advanced topics, the features section is going to be a lot more complicated. In this case, the code block is actually both very simple and very complicated. It literally is just a place that you can put HTML.
Has joined the conference.
That's pretty much it. It's a very simple feature, but extremely powerful because anything that you can do in HTML or CSS or JavaScript you can do using code block. So the benefits of this obviously are that unlike creating a component which can take weeks or in some cases even months for really complicated, powerful components, Code block is something that can give you very, very fast speed to market. Also because the effort is really focused on that one single version of that experience, it's less effort to create that experience using code block. This also gives you a lot of flexibility and customization. The downsides are sort of the mirror of all of the upsides. It's not self-service. You do need typically a developer or someone with that skill set to help in creating the code block.
Has joined the conference.
We also want QA to take a look at what is there and test it across all the different scenarios that it might be used in, because unlike, all of our normal components and templates go through a pretty significant amount of QA when they're initially created or updated, and that tests, cross-browser compatibility and responsive behavior and performance and all sorts of other things like that. Code block, you're just doing it you're taking a big shortcut, and so you have to do that QA for the individual code. You also have to do that during subsequent releases because it's possible that something you did in code block might not work properly with something new that's getting released. And the page owner is fully accountable for that. So unlike normal components where if there's a defect in it, the component owner it's their responsibility to fix that, make sure that what the features are advertised to that component work properly. Code block is pretty much you completely own it, which means if anything breaks, it's ultimately your responsibility to be aware that it's broken as well as to fix it. And last but not least, another drawback is that code block creates the sort of possibility that it really blurs the line, I guess, between what is code and what is content. And that if you're technical enough, that line is always blurry. But the more we can keep that line strong and have clear separation of code and content, the better it is, because content, when you have a good separation of those two, you can, in many instances, change the code quite a bit without having to change the content, or vice versa. So that, if you can keep a clean separation between those two, you could, for example, it's conceivable you could actually take a page that was built non-responsive and make it responsive without having to reauthor any of the content, for example. So when you use code block, you're really blurring those lines, though, and basically any sort of options like that are pretty much immediately taken off the table. So background and context. First, I guess to best explain code block, this is sort of information that's important for everyone to understand. So I know some of the more technical folks, this is probably obvious to them, but my suspicion is that a lot of the CMS users, this might be an aha moment for you. So under the hood, basically, every web experience is HTML, and that's whether it's created through AEM CMS or Open CMS, hard-coded in Showroom, it was hard-coded in ATG, anywhere else. They're all ultimately delivered to a user's browser as HTML. And so what a regular CMS component does is essentially give you a simple, non-technical and standardized way to create that HTML. So from a content creation perspective, gives you the tools to author the content, whether that's to type in text or to configure how what font size it's supposed to be or what alignment it's supposed to be, those sorts of things, and then store that in AEM. And then AEM, standard AEM component essentially takes that stored, authored version of the content, and when a end customer requests the content, it renders it into HTML, delivers it to the user's browser, and the user sees it. And so what the code block component is basically a way to just add raw HTML so that if there's a situation where you can't do what you need, it gives you the option to do that. So I'm going to switch really quickly here over to a browser and just show you quickly what that looks like. So this is the page that I'm going to be doing other parts of the demo on, but I will go ahead down here and just in this container, I will add a text component. Or actually, let me add it here. Okay, and I'm going to edit this text here. This is sort of, this is the behind-the-scenes version of your very first day in training that you've all had. So I'm going to reload the page here that I was showing. You can see here, down here at the very bottom, the text says hello world. And if I were to look hello world, you can see this here. So what you see here, this is basically what the component is doing. So this div class equals ctext is what identifies this as the rich text component, and then this is the text that I wrote out, which is hello world. And so if I were to do any other editing to this, let's say let's see where to go. Here we go. Let's say I make this into a heading 1, and I hit OK, and I go back here, reload. All right, so now you can see instead of being the P symbol for paragraphs, it's got the H1, but the div class ctext hasn't changed. And so if you ever look through the source code, what you'll see is a lot of classes that start with C. So this, you can see it's C container. I won't waste your time by looking through this exhaustively, but you'll see lots of places where you might see something started by a C, and that basically shows you, or that's sort of a, if not all components do that, but that's sort of a naming convention. You might see the component. So the output of this, what a customer sees in this case is a paragraph. What a customer would see in the next case is a headline level 1 style here, and what you see here is basically the HTML difference between the two. Now, the benefit of a component then is that let me go back here. The benefit of a component then is that when I change that, you notice I didn't have to type H1. I didn't have to find the beginning of the line or the end of the line. I pretty much just clicked somewhere in here in this text and clicked this drop down, and behind the scenes it sort of automatically knew how to switch that from a paragraph to a headline, right? So that's this is a very, very simple component, but if you look at our much more complicated components like carousels or product choosers or things like that, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript underneath the hood that makes them work properly can get incredibly complicated. And so that's where the power of components comes in that you have sort of this nice UI. You can, that's debatable. We know usability isn't great on some of the components, but you have a UI. You can edit the, use that to configure the component, and then the component code takes care of turning that into HTML. So that's just a preview of sort of how components work in general. Now, what a code block does is, I'll go ahead and add a new code block below this text here. I will add a, let's see, this is alphabetical order. I will add code block. Okay.
Has joined the conference.
Okay. Now, if I don't do anything else to this and reload this page here, what you see is this was the text component, div class ctext, h1, hello world, and this is the end of the text component. And then you can see this just says, this is my code block. There's nothing else. So this
has left the conference.
Pretty generous. They won't, they do their best to show the proper thing. But generally speaking, you'd never have text in a web page that isn't wrapped in some sort of HTML tag. But because this is code block, it's basically letting me do whatever I want. I can literally type anything in here, and what the component will do instead of rendering, basically what the text component does is when it renders, it generates all this other markup. The code block just takes literally whatever you type, so you get this. Now, where that gets interesting is I could copy this, and I could actually put that in here. And I'll put some comments around this so that we can keep track of what we're seeing here. Code block, and this is HTML comment for those who not familiar with that, and this would be end of code block. Okay. All right, and now you get something that actually looks almost exactly like the thing you saw above it. So if I reload this, you'll see the same thing here. If I reload this, you'll see the same thing here. So you see now this says start of code block. You have
has left the conference.
And then end of code block. But in terms of the HTML, it basically looks almost
has left the conference.
Glad, hopefully not boring people too much. Basically it looks exactly the same. And you can see here in the customer experience, the user sees it looks basically exactly the same. And in the code here, it looks very, very similar. So now this is a use case that you would never do because you already have a text component that can do this and a whole lot more. So, you know, you wouldn't ever use code block for this. But if there was ever something that you needed to do that you couldn't do in a normal text component, this would be one way that you could do it. So, for example, this is something actually you technically could do in any other thing, but I'll show you this as just an example. Color red. Okay. And now the color, this might not show up very well over WebEx, but you can see the color of this headline changed. And if I were to show the code and show that in the preview, you would see the same, basically, literally whatever is typed. Now the problem with this is that you are, in doing this, you're writing the code. So if you made a mistake, let's say that you did a single quote here instead of a double quote in this style, and hit OK, now it doesn't display at all because that single quote is basically not well defined.
Has joined the conference.
Doesn't know how to display that properly, and so something as simple as a very small typo can prevent something from working. And this is a very, very simple example. You can imagine in examples that are any longer and more complicated. You're basically in developer land now, dealing with the sorts of things that developers have to deal with in terms of figuring out why something isn't working the way they expect it to, whether it's a true coding issue or just typo. So that's a very quick overview. I'm going to switch back to the presentation now. So that hopefully helps you kind of understand that a normal component is really just a way of getting HTML into a page that will show a user an experience, but doing it in a very standardized way and in a non-technical way. And the code block component is basically a shortcut that lets you skip the simple, non-technical, standard stuff and do something exactly in the HTML that you'd want it to be. So this leads us to use cases. When would you use this? So the most common use cases, the ones we strongly recommend you use these for, are for A/B testing and for quick fixes for something you might need that maybe should be a feature but isn't, and you realize that very shortly before you need it, and you don't have the time for all the rigor that goes into a normal component, so you need to do something quickly. And so I think both of these are important because A/B testing, for example, if you have a new concept and it's unproven. You don't have any data, you haven't done any testing, you're not 100% sure that this is actually going to be the right way to do something. The last thing that you want to do for an unproven concept is to actually build a component, because you're taking all of this effort and overhead and time to market to build a component, and you don't even know if it's going to work. And even if it does work, it may be that the final version of it after a couple iterations of testing actually is a little bit different than what you tested, and the requirements you have for that component after 2 or 3 rounds of testing might be slightly different than what you thought the requirements were when you first started. So A/B testing is an ideal scenario for using code block. Now, where it's less desirable, where you need to be very careful, is replicating functionality that already exists in a component. So that example I gave of using code block to do something that is completely achievable using a text component, you definitely wouldn't ever want to do that, because a code block takes more effort, it's more risky, a single typo could break the whole thing, and it's really overkill if that function already exists. The other 2 things, and this is where we basically need to sort of hit the reset button on how we've been using code block, is you also don't want to use it as your long-term rollout solution. So if an A/B test wins, if you have 1 or 2 or 3 more tests you need to run, continue doing those tests using code block. But once you have a winner, you really, really should take that and turn it into a component rather than continuing to use it as code block. The other area that you shouldn't use it for is as a long-term Band-Aid for an unsupported CMS feature. So if, and actually the 2 demos I'm about to give are sort of good examples of the positive of code block, but also the cautionary tales for these 2 points here. In that there's, you might find a use case that's not supported, use code block to allow you to accomplish that use case, but if you don't eventually roll that into the requirements for the normal component, normal template, you're creating the potential for problems later. And so this is, I'll show you a little bit more about that when I get to the demo in just a second. In terms of best known methods, as I mentioned a little moment ago, from a people and process perspective, typically you do want a developer to write the code. Now it doesn't have to be an actual person with, engineer in their job title. It could be a marketer. But the point is that basically you do need pretty solid HTML, CSS, and potentially JavaScript skills to write the code. And so you want to make sure that that's being done by someone who has that skill set. So, and this is important for both your developers and marketers to understand. Just because it's a component doesn't mean a developer can say, no, I'm not going to do that. You, marketer, have to go learn HTML to figure this out. And vice versa, marketers should be very cautious, make sure they really know what they're doing before they start messing around within a code block. Now, that's writing the code. Actually putting it on the page, in most cases, that is something that an author can do. An author can add the component to the page. They can edit, hit edit and paste the code into the component. The only sort of caveats there are to just know that where the code is on the page can matter. So the developer that works on that code will most likely tell you, put it at the top of the page or put it at the bottom of the page, put it between these 2 components, something like that. So just make sure that you know that and that matters. And also, ideally, you want to get the code as a plain text file because things like quotes and certain characters, Outlook and Microsoft Office have a tendency to convert sort of ugly quotes into fancy quotes, but those fancy quotes are not quotes that most programming languages understand. And so, just making sure that the code is sort of as original as possible when you paste it in will save you some time and trouble. Now, in terms of the actual approach, these are the 3 things I'm going to demo here. First is using code block to modify an existing component. So if the use case that you have is something that's 90% or 80% or even 70% covered by existing templates and component functionality, what you want to do is actually build as much of the page as possible using those standard features, and then use code block only as sort of the fudge factor you need to actually get the experience that you need. Less good, but still a viable option is to use code block to actually top to bottom completely create the new experience, but to leverage some of the existing styles and functionality that are there in CMS and present on the page. That way you're not completely reinventing the wheel. And more importantly, when you do that approach, when you do either of these first two approaches, not only is it a little bit faster and easier to launch it, but it's less likely to have problems while the code block is active. And also, it should be a more straightforward thing to roll out once you're done with it. Because if you're 90% of what you're using is standard, then the 10% that's not standard is a lot easier to add to an existing component than it is to completely reinvent a component from the ground up. And that's where sort of the meh approach is to use code block to author something completely new without using any existing component or template functionality. So this is something that's done occasionally for promos. There might be a takeover that's a very flashy, animated, something or other, and it's the kind of thing that we actually do that experience one time. The next promo we do is something completely different. There are completely valid use cases where you might do something completely new and novel, but be really mindful of that and make sure that it truly is something new. For in the promo example, if you find that the flashy animated thing is actually something that you only change a little bit each promo, then maybe that should actually be a component. Instead of doing that with code block, just make it into a component, standardize the things that are repeated each promo, and make it authorable for whatever changes. That way, again, you're not using code block as sort of a patch for something that should be a component. All right, and the caveats, this is sort of the flip side of this coin, is, as I mentioned a few times, code block should be temporary. So if you have an A/B test, when it is done, if the test was a loser, just archive it. If it was a winner, it's okay to temporarily roll out the winner using code block while you're working on engineering the bigger, longer-term solution. But ultimately, that winner should be rolled out by creating and updating a component or template that's related to it. Same thing with quick fixes. If there's some issue that you identify, go ahead and fix it using code block to get it out there right away. But ideally, what you want to do is, within a few days of getting the quick fix out there, put in the request to engineering to make the fix permanent. Because if you don't do that, you end up with an accumulation of code blocks, and things become very unmanageable. And this is the second item is one example of why you don't want code blocks to accumulate. If you any change that's made to CMS could potentially break how your code block is working. And I'll give you an example of this in just a moment. But because that could happen, and because you are solely responsible for creating it and putting it into place, you can't expect any other team to be checking your page and verifying your page to make sure that that code block is working. So you basically want your QA team to actually check all of your code block instances before any CMS release happens to make sure that that release didn't break anything in your code block. Now, if a CMS feature being released does break something in your code block, that's not a bug to be filed against the CMS release. That's a fix that you have to make to your code block, because the code block is the thing that's non-standard and not following sort of normal functionality. And so, again, you can imagine if you had a lot of these out there, platform feature changes in some way that breaks your code block, it might take a lot of effort to go and update all of those because some functionality they were relying on changed. And last but not least, code block, because it's very powerful and very flexible, can be an easy way to sort of skip over the dev process. Hey, we don't need a component for that, we'll just do it in code block. hey, gosh, it takes a while, and I don't know if XB is going to say yes to this thing that we're doing a little bit differently. Or brand standards. Oh, I know we're only supposed to use this color for this type of product positioning and this color for this, but I think it would be much more impactful for my campaign if I change that. So code block should not be seen at all as a way to work around these obligations. For the purpose of testing, you can use it temporarily. Maybe from a brand perspective, we could introduce a new element. We want to see if that's viable or not. You test it, you find that it's very effective. Maybe that can go into updating our brand standards. But code block should not be seen as a way to work around these things, because I've mentioned so far a lot of the technical downsides to it, but there's also really serious customer experience downside to it, which is that as customers very rarely only visit one page or one part of the page. They often visit multiple pages, multiple different channels across the business unit, and so by making sure that they can see a consistent experience in all those touch points, it makes the learn, shop, buy experience a lot better and smoother for our customers. All right, so I'm going to jump into the demo here real quick to show a couple of these points. Before I do that, does anybody have any questions or comments on what I've covered so far? Okay, we'll have more time for questions at the end. All right, so I'm going to show basically these two scenarios here using code block. Actually, first I'll show the scenario where something could break, and then I'll show these two approaches here. So in terms of, I'll go back to the example I was giving just a moment ago with this, in terms of how a dev release could cause you major headaches. So I'm going to change this back so that it's H1. I'm going to reload this, and all right. So now if I inspect, I'm going to inspect, use the Chrome DevTools here to inspect this element. And you can see here, actually I'll inspect the standard one, do that. All right, so you can see here H1, and over here are the styles that determine what that looks like. So you can see here media screen, H1, H2, H3, letter spacing is -1 pixel. That makes the letters a little closer together. Media screen H1 and class H1 gives you the font family, font weight, and font size, et cetera. And this, you can see, is included in the standard.
Has left the conference.
This is included in the standard CSS assets for this page template. Okay, so essentially, there's a CSS file out there somewhere that is determining what this should look like. And in this case, it's targeting just H1 to apply these font families. Now let's see if there's any, might end up, I need a slightly different example for this. There's C-text. All right, let me, I think, actually this would be a better one. All right. Or maybe, all right, so here we go. So this is an example of a style this is a heading 4 style. You can see here in the CSS for this, it's not just applying the style to this heading element. It's actually saying, if this is a comp chart mini pricing header, and it's H3, or it's a comp chart mini pricing header, and it's an H4, then we want to style it in this way. So this is basically a way to make this font look a little bit different when it's part of a price card than it would if it was standing all by itself over here. Now, this is dependent on there being a class called comp chart mini pricing header text in order for the style to work properly.
Has left the conference.
Where you can get into trouble by doing things customized in code block is there could be, let's say for the new brand activation, there's a refactoring to how these styles work for price cards and for comparison charts. And so in that refactoring, what they might end up doing is also renaming some of these elements. So instead of being called comp chart mini pricing header, they might call it comp chart pricing level 1, something like that. There's a lot of different ways you could go with that, but there may be some changes they make to that. Now, when they make that change, they could change how this component gets rendered, because when this is stored by AEM, AEM is not storing all of this HTML when you're editing it. AEM is actually storing sort of an abstracted representation of this, which is, this is a price card component, this is a header in a price card component. And so there's a rendering process that converts what you configured into the HTML, and that rendering process could potentially change over time. And so the risk that you could find yourself in is that you might re-implement this price card, in a way that you think works exactly the way that it works today, but a month later, the way that component works and the way it's rendered could actually change, and that would result in the style changing as well as the component changing. Your code block is now referencing styles that don't exist anymore, and it stops working. So this type of thing doesn't happen all the time. It's relatively rare, but it's important that components and component developers have the ability to change how they're rendered to accommodate new styles and features. And so if you're using a code block, you have to be very careful to make sure that you're not depending on anything that changes. Okay, so now to a couple of examples of using code block to modify some existing components. So I actually have 2 examples of almost the same use case. So this page, the requirement was that the QuickBooks, when self-employed, historically QuickBooks Online just had 3 product versions: Simple Start, Essentials, and Plus. But self-employed came about and got added to the lineup. And so with self-employed, that meant that we now needed to have 4
items. Has left the conference.
4 items in each of these lineups, but we could not, the component when it was initially created was only created to accommodate 1, 2, or 3 items. And so what would happen by default if you, show you what this would look like. So I'm going to, this is showing you what it looks like after the code block is in place. I'm going to go ahead and delete this, or actually, I will just comment it out. Okay. So what happens when you
add left the conference.
4 columns to this component is that it doesn't look right, basically. So each of these columns you can see is a little bit too wide relative to the price card. The price card is a little bit narrower than the column, and the price cards also don't all fit here because this container that they're in was only built to accommodate 3 price cards, not 4 price cards. So, we needed to go live with this experience relatively quickly, but we couldn't use the component as it existed to go live with this. And so what this code block does, quite simply, is, and I'll copy this into a text editor to make it a little easier to see. What this code block does is it adds a style, a bit of CSS style. It changes the column size of some of the table column, the first column rather, to be a little bit narrower so that the headline still fits, but the other columns can get wider. Changes the width of some of the columns so that they're 60% instead of whatever the default was, and then changes the width of some of the other columns. They're 40% instead of what the other was. And so when doing this, basically when this was put into place, you get something that in CMS, in the editing mode, doesn't actually look terribly different. Looks pretty much the same as did before. But when you actually preview the page, you can see now that this column got a little bit wider. Each of these columns now correctly matches the size of the price card, and everything sort of fits and looks the way that you think that it should. So that would be an example of a quick fix. And actually, I believe this was a quick fix, but it was done, I believe, as part of an A/B test. So it's a very easy, quick way to bring this to market, and also without having to change too much. This is one approach. Now, the other approach I'm going to show you is actually trying to solve effectively the same business objectives. You can see here, this looks pretty similar. Obviously, instead of QuickBooks Online, it says compare products. This text is at the top instead of a line here. But all in all, this actually looks fairly similar to what you saw on the other page. The difference in how it was implemented, though, if you look at this, is that there actually is no comp chart component. All you have here is compare products. So it's just a code block, and if I hit edit, and I'm going to hit all copy, just put this in a text editor to show you. You can see that instead of basically 15 lines of code, this is actually 377 lines of code, and significantly more complicated code. You actually have some JavaScript in here. A lot of this is actually JavaScript. You have all of the columns, all the items in that comparison chart are in here as HTML, a lot of code here. Now, there's two downsides to this. The first is that you really need a developer to put this together. It's a little bit more complicated than an author really probably should be doing, taking the time to do. The other big downside is that it's no longer editable. So with this sort of quick fix version, the formatting is fixed. But if you need to edit anything, you can still use, all of these are still normal components. So for example, if you wanted to change your CTA button text, you can still edit this component and change the CTA text fairly easily, get a different CTA. It all works as you'd expect it to work. Here, if you need to change this CTA to be something else, you would actually have to go to find, doing a text search here. Now, all right, and it looks like, where is this? There it is. So you can see here, you'd have to, it's a lot more challenging to find and change this, and you have to be comfortable enough with HTML to do this. So if knowing what you saw a moment ago, that just a single quote versus a double quote can completely break something, to go in here and even edit this, you have to be comfortable enough to know that that's okay to do. And forget any of the other advanced features. For example, if you wanted to, in this other one, if you needed to change the link tracking, for example, you could change that link tracking right here. The other one, you have to know that link tracking shows up in the HTML as data, WA link, whatever. So basically, your knowledge has to expand nearly exponentially to be able to manage anything in here after it's been edited. So so I'm giving this as an example of a thing not to do, but I do want to acknowledge for this other one that this is still in the good category. So it's using code block to create new experiences, but it is leveraging many existing styles and functionality. So for example, in that code I was showing you here that has the, I guess this doesn't have link tracking. Let's find one that does. Okay, so this has link tracking here. And in this case, because this is using the still standard format for identifying links that need to be tracked, this version of this page is able to be used. You can get link tracking to work properly here, and you don't have to re-implement the entire link tracking functionality. There's a whole other JavaScript library that hundreds of lines of code, lots of effort over the years to build up that tracking library, and those are all still features that you can take advantage of as long as you're building this in a way that's similar to what a component would output, versus trying to completely re-implement it yourself. So, and even things like the typography, what font styles you see here. If I use inspect element here to look at some of these, you'll see that actually the styles are still coming. Comparison chart table is still coming from the standard style library. So even though this is sort of from scratch, it's still able to take advantage of a lot of existing functionality. Now, the least desirable approach would be to do something completely new, and that's least desirable for a couple reasons. One is, there's the obvious that it's going to take more time and effort to create something completely new from scratch. The bigger reason is what the future life of that thing would be. So, in the case where, in the recommended approaches here recommended approaches in terms of rolling something out, you don't, if it wins, you want to build it into a normal component. And so if you're doing something completely out there, it has to still go through design review and with XD, dev, et cetera, to make sure that that's actually something that could live on as a standard feature. And so the more custom stuff you do, the more trouble you potentially get yourself into in rolling it out. And a good example of that is actually on this page. This pricing chart is using a column layout. So this section of the page is also done using code block, and it's using a column layout that's not standard. So you can see that this price chart here has 1, 2, 3, 4 columns in it. This is a 5th column, but this or text here column is non-standard. There's no real example that exists for that. And so this is something that wasn't rolled out via code block or wasn't rolled out as a component, in part because there is, I think this exists on 2 pages now, but out of 3,500 pages, there are only 2 instances of this. So it's a really unique, unusual thing. And so for that reason, it was never built out as a component because it's non-standard. And so this is an area where even though you could do this for the sake of an A/B test, you might actually want to really think very carefully, is this even a concept that I want to test if it's not following any of our standard columns and layout and design rules? Because if I test this, where does it go next if it wins and I need to roll it out? All right, so that covers the most of the major caveats and demonstration. So in terms of exercises, these pages will be put onto the training server. We'll have the links in here before we send out this deck. And this is also going to get posted. I guess I can skip here to some of the next steps. We're also going to post this recording and help guide PowerPoint and everything on the wiki so you guys can refer to it. In terms of exercises, I think a great exercise is just repeat everything, repeat the things that you saw here, and potentially to take some things that you see created by a normal component and try to recreate them using code block. That's a good exercise. But a lot of the exercises really do depend on what type of user you are. For most of the CMS authors and even producers and designers, there's probably not a lot of exercise here that you're going to want to do because most of the interesting stuff is actually stuff that a developer would be doing. But please, take a look at all this once it's posted, and if you do have any questions or would like help with any exercise you're trying to do yourself, let us know. We'll be more than happy to help you try it out and find some different, if there's any questions you have, happy to answer those. So that's pretty much the end of the presentation I have. We have actually, I think we're booked past all the way to 1:30, so we have 8 minutes for questions, but if it goes longer than that, I'll stick around. We can keep discussing this until all your questions are answered.
Andre. Thanks, Jeff. Anyone have any questions?
Has left the conference.
Dean.
Has left the conference.
Zach, you were so thorough.
Nothing left to discuss. Well,
yeah.
if there are any questions, I do have a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I just heard you.
Sorry, I am Darpan. I'm a developer, so it's kind of a developer kind of question. The example you have shown is mostly CSS and divs and HTML and CSS. So from your presentation, it looks like I can have my own JavaScripts there.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Let me actually, in this context slide here, I was trying to give you guys, peel back the show behind the curtain a little bit to what's going on. To answer your question, I'll actually peel it back a little bit further, which is to say the separation between HTML, the HTML document, and included files. So in this particular page, when I hit View Page Source, I see all of this HTML here that goes into this page. But if I use the network tools to look at everything that actually goes sort of back and forth when a page loads, let me just do this really quickly. So when I hit View Source here, I'm seeing this HTML document here. That's this line right here. That's what I'm seeing. Basically, there's a request and a response, and I get that document. Right? Now, everything else in this list are resources that are requested by this document. So if I actually look for standard-83, you can see that there's actually this link href QASSR blah 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 to merge standard CSS. All these other CSS files here, and so these are basically all of the other resources that are being pulled in by this page. Now, what CodeBlock lets you do, essentially what I was demoing, is that in this HTML document, it gives you a place that you can put things. And so if I look here, basically in this long list of things, all of these things are going to be there as part of the normal page being delivered, but it gives me a place within this that I can put things. And so to answer your question, anything that's valid HTML in the location that code block is inserted can absolutely be put within CodeBlock. So if you want to, I think the example that exists here is if I did a script. Actually, this might be down here. No, if I can find this here. Yeah, so this is the this script tag was actually added as part of the code block. So you can definitely do inline JavaScript. You can actually link. It is valid HTML to link a JavaScript file from HTML within CodeBlock. The only thing to be mindful of is that because CodeBlock is inserted on a page like a component, it's going to be that HTML code will live in the page wherever you've inserted it, and it will. And the only place you can put stuff, the only place you can put components is in the body section of the HTML document, not the head. And so basically, as long as everything you want to do will work fine with those limitations, you can do that. Now, if you need to do anything more advanced than that, we actually have a code block template that lets you insert code block in head or body, and it also lets you selectively enable or disable some of the other automatically included things like automatically included styles, automatically included analytics code, any of these other sorts of things. It doesn't give you a fully empty document that you can work with, but it gives you a very stripped down one. So if there are scenarios that you have where you need something even more custom, that is also possible through that template.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Do you have other questions?
I have non-related to presentation.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Or?
Has left the conference.
What was the question?
Does anyone else have any questions? For Zach, it was a great time while you've got him on the line.
I thought I heard somebody say that they had a question.
I have a non-related presentation question. I need access to the production AEM, but I'm not able to find the right person. I don't know if it's the right person.
Yeah, we'll take that. We'll take maybe just send me an instant message or email when we're off the presentation. I can walk through that with you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Zach is the right person.
Yeah, and I do have a question for you guys, for the folks that are still on. Are there any scenarios? I think I covered a couple of the major scenarios, examples where code block is used. Are there any other places you've seen it used that fall outside of the examples that I've given?
Sometimes I get a requirement that you have to display a page which is not hosted in AEM, like outside AEM.
Okay.
Like include some other page which is on my account side, but display it in the AEM for just a reference kind of a screen.
Okay.
So those things I guess I'll have to do using iframe in code block.
Okay, that's interesting. That's a good use case. Okay, and any, I guess, interested, or does anybody have any thoughts or feedback on these methods and caveats? I know this is potentially controversial, so I'm interested to hear any thoughts people have on that. But if there aren't, we can always talk about it later. So, and actually, I thought I had this room booked that I'm in, but it looks like I might be getting kicked out. So, it might be a good time to call it a day. So, thanks everybody for attending, and I'll let Chris wrap us up.
You bet. Thanks, Zach. It was awesome. So let me just share my screen here real quick.
Actually, I can do, okay.
So as Zach alluded to or talked about, we're going to post these up on the CMS Online Help Guide. We'll have the deck, the recording, and some idea of some exercises you can do to kind of get your hands on and try it yourself. I just wanted to do a quick, let you guys know what's coming up for the series. So we just did code block. Next week at this time, we're going to be going through and talking about workflows. The following week, building pages for better performance. And I think we've got a couple of different ideas on that and who's going to be presenting out on that. And then on the 29th, Chris and Tom scheduling multiple promo banners and containers. So if anybody on the line has ideas for, hey, I'd really like to get more information on this particular topic, please just go ahead and send those over. Go ahead and email those to me. And that way we can, we know that we've had a need for these 4 topics just in general, so we're going to blitz these out in January, and we'll figure out what kind of the cadence is going to look like moving forward. So maybe we'll do 2 a month or 1 a month or whatever it may be. If you have any recommendations, suggestions for topics, or even for the format of this, I felt like there was a lot of really good information, and again, you can always go back and re-review that on the CMS Online Help Guide, to go ahead and send those ideas over. So if you don't have anything else and don't have any questions, then you guys are free to go. So thanks a lot for attending.
Has left the conference.
Thanks for presenting out. Appreciate it.
Claire Tai
has left the conference.
You guys have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys. Gunjan
has left the conference. Has left the conference. Has left the conference.
Chris Augustine
has left the conference. Has left the conference.
Mark
has left the conference. Has left the conference.